There are those of us who relish the sound of birdsong every morning, a symphony to the ears, so to speak, and others who sort of wish that birds in the morning came with a built-in mute button. As with anything, I'm sure there are those of you who fit into neither of these categories, and that's completely fine. But I'm here to tell you that no matter how you categorize yourself, it's largely out of your control. Yes, whether you're an early bird or a night owl is for the most part based on your genetics. And I say for the most part because there are some environmental factors which play a minor role. But that major role is played by something called your chronotype. Now, your chronotype is your natural inclination to the time of day when you're most alert, most energetic, or when you most prefer to sleep. So, why do humans differ on this aspect in particular? How is society then accommodating these differences? And objectively, which of the two groups is more advantageous in today's day and age? Every living organism has an internal clock, which in essence maintains order within the body, known as its circadian rhythm. In humans, the circadian rhythm is located in a part of the brain called the hypothalamus and is essential in ensuring that your primary organs work harmoniously, but more relevantly in governing our sleeping cycles. And as I'm sure you've surmised, not everyone has the same circadian rhythm, the same way that you don't have the same sleeping cycle. And the real biological reason behind why you might sleep later than him is because the pineal gland is stimulated to release large amounts of the sleep hormone melatonin at a later time in you rather than in him. So it makes a lot of sense. It's very logical. But let's go back to that earlier point, the fact that your categorization as an early bird or a night owl is almost solely based on the genes passed down from your ancestors. And from an evolutionary perspective, it actually makes a lot more sense than you might think. I mean, think about it. From the era of hunter-gatherers, it was necessary for some in the tribe to stay awake while the rest slept, with the roles reversing come daylight. And this is, of course, to ensure the security of the tribe as a whole. And it's been thought that this adaptation has been passed on from generation to generation up until the present day, although a lot more subtly, of course. In fact, this theory was actually tested during a study of the Hadza tribe of Tanzania in 2017. Now, the Hadza are hunter-gatherers in the modern day who have a lifestyle very similar to that of early humans. And over the time where the study was carried out, around 220 hours, it was discovered that there were only 18 minutes spread out in 1-minute increments across 20 nights when all 33 participants were soundly asleep. That is to say that individuals in the group were almost never asleep at the exact same time, which sort of confirms the idea that this adaptation might have been passed on a lot further than we might have expected. As a teenager, I also find myself sleeping a lot later than the rest of my family, although not to such an extent, of course. And I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised that this is the case for most adolescents. I mean, most of you here are adolescents. But that really begs the question, surely such a large proportion of the population can't all fit into the same category, genetically speaking, and also probability-wise. And in saying this, you would be 100% correct. In fact, alterations in your sleeping patterns during your teenage years can mostly be attributed to hormonal imbalances. I mean, you hear it all the time. So, doesn't this put us at a sort of disadvantage? Well, no, not really. When we begin to enter adulthood, these changes gradually revert back to their genetic default. But this is where it gets tricky, because this genetic default can actually bring a few problems with it. Again, just think about it. Despite comprising over 1/3 of the population, night owls are clearly at a disadvantage. With over 80% of daily routines starting at 6 a.m. and ending at 6 p.m., night owls have to alter their own sleeping schedules in order to accommodate societal norms. And in doing so, they unfortunately experience a phenomenon under the name of social jet lag. Now, social jet lag, like any other chronic sleep deprivation, can be very detrimental to not only your productivity, but also your physical and mental well-being. But by far the worst part about social jet lag is that it won't simply disappear, even after the recommended 7 to 9 hours of sleep. But why is this? Well, it all comes back to that central theme, that central topic, your circadian rhythm. And by deviating from your predisposed sleeping cycle, there are unfortunately some consequences. Studies have already developed causal links between sleeping later and certain health problems stemming from diabetes, all the way to obesity, sleep apnea, and high blood pressure. In fact, obesity, just by sleeping a few hours later, has an increased incidence of around 33%. But don't worry, night owls. As much as I've rambled on about how you guys are at a disadvantage, it's not all that bad. In fact, studies show that you guys are a lot more creative. You have greater cognitive capabilities, and you're better risk takers. Now, better risk takers, what does that actually mean? Well, not only do you take more risks, but out of these risks, you tend to gain a lot more. In fact, studies show that late night owls tend to have greater levels of the hormone cortisol in their blood, which, despite being attributed to taking on threats, can actually have some impact on your risk-taking ability. But let's go back to that earlier point, the fact that you guys are a lot more creative. Well, the Catholic University of Sacred Heart in Milan actually carried out a study where participants were asked to only draw pictures with straight lines or curved lines. And it's safe to say that the night owls, well, they did phenomenally, while their early rising counterparts, not so much. In fact, they struggled to attain a passing grade. And it's thought that this innate creativity comes from the fact that night owls have to be a lot better at adapting themselves to their environments and therefore tend to think outside of the box a lot more. But while I'm sure I can stand here and indefinitely list out the pros and cons of each category, that won't really do us much good because we still possess an innate inability to control our circadian rhythms. So once again, it begs another question. Why isn't urban working life more accommodating to such a large proportion of the population? Well, Professor Matthias Basner from the University of Pennsylvania came up with a relatively simple solution. After analyzing over 100,000 American adults, he came to the conclusion that the working day, well, it should start a few hours later. And while it sounds very simple to you, there are problems that come with it. But from a scientific perspective, he definitely was on the right lines. In fact, studies show that people who wake up earlier to start a shift at, say, 6 a.m. tend to only get around 6 hours of sleep, while people that wake up at around 7 or 8 to start their shift at 9 or 10 get around 7.5 hours of sleep. And you might be thinking, well, an hour and a half difference, well, that's not really that much. But you'd actually be surprised because experts have come to the conclusion that by missing an hour or two of sleep over consecutive days, it can actually be the equivalent of functioning without an entire night of sleep. And no, unfortunately, you can't functionally adapt to sleep deprivation. That is to say, no matter how many times you go to sleep at 1 a.m. and wake up at 5 a.m., you're not going to get used to it. That's just not how it works. So not only will your productivity suffer, but also your mental and physical well-being. The shifting of our mindset from the standard 9 to 5 has become a lot more popular, especially after the recent pandemic-induced remote work year-and-a-half experiment, which from a corporate standpoint was an undisputed success. In fact, Forbes magazine quotes that Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft, as well as many other corporations, recorded record profits, as well as the fact that the stock market was at an all-time high and worker productivity was dare I say it again, phenomenal. But in my opinion, the best part about staying home from work, or from school in my case, is that it's almost impossible to be late for meetings, or for appointments, or, again, school. But for the meantime, while we're no longer in our remote working environment, if you ever find yourself getting to an appointment late, getting to work late, or getting to school late, just remember, the blame is by no means on you, but on a 300,000-year legacy that came before you. Thank you.